my chair in position.
Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast. From Philly, I've got Bill Carlin. He's founder and he's a CMO and co-founder of Racklify.com, which we're going to hear all about. And he's got over a decade of experience in e-commerce and running 3PL operations. We're going to talk about revolutionizing logistics, 3PL, scaling e-commerce, and really happy to have him on to discuss this area. Bill, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah. Briefly detail your journey and what you do at Racklify and how the audience can benefit.
Yeah, so I'll give you the Spark Notes version. I started off with wholesale distribution, right? So we were buying products in China, bringing them to the US, selling them to different retailers and stores around the country. And around that time, it was 2014, 2015, Amazon was really taking off, right? This was only a few years after they introduced Prime, right? So we decided, hey, let's start getting into e-commerce, right? So we grew a pretty successful e-commerce business, grew to almost $10 million a year in revenue. And then we decided to go try a 3PL, right? So we went out, we found a 3PL, which is a third-party logistics provider. So think like a warehouse that houses your products, because we wanted to sell on Walmart, we wanted to sell on Shopify, we wanted to sell on some of these like new emerging marketplaces. We had not so good of an experience, so we decided we were going to go out, start our own 3PL, and build the experience the way that we would want to have it as an e-commerce customer. So the idea to get into the whole 3PL space almost 10 years ago stemmed from my experiences as the e-commerce seller and the challenges I was facing. So fast forward a few years from there, and this is where Racklify comes in the equation, is we were hearing from numerous consultants, matchmakers, brokers, trying to give us leads, but they wanted to charge us money, right? They wanted all kinds of fees to talk to people, reoccurring charges on the revenue, right? And we just didn't think the business was handled the right way. It wasn't transparent how they were making money. Merchants were indirectly paying for this service and they didn't even know it. And we set out to build a platform where you can do a 3PL search by yourself in a traditional marketplace model that doesn't have those biases built in.
Yeah. Really fascinating. And what's really fascinating, because whenever I hear platform or service, something as a service, I always perk up because that's like where our economy is platforms and software and service based. Racklify.com, it's a groundbreaking platform that's revolutionizing the way merchants connect with warehouses and service providers. So what is the problem with the traditional way that merchants connect, and how does Racklify solve that problem?
Yeah, so I'll take you back to the base of the problem. So the base of the problem was up until a few years ago, the 3PL search was mainly done one of two ways. It was either done with a Google search, warehouse near me, public warehousing near me, warehouse Philadelphia, right? These common Google search terms. And being a human, you don't have time to interview 20, 30, 50 of these. So you interview 3 and you hope the one you picked was the winner, right? So that's the way this was done years ago. Now, in more recent times, a lot of people are turning to what they call matchmaker, right? Which is somebody that you give them some search criteria, you fill out an RFP, they take that RFP and they sell it to the highest bidder, for lack of a better way of putting it. So this is the way a lot of people are doing it now through consultants or matchmakers or brokers. So what we want to do is revolutionize this in a way that gives you the power back. So what we did is we built a pure marketplace play. So think of it similar to shopping on Amazon, right? When you shop on Amazon, say you want to buy gym socks, you get 1,000 reviews for gym socks, right? 1,000 different products. Everyone has a little bit of difference. They tell you what the difference is, how it works, and you could choose any of those gym socks. Amazon doesn't care which one you buy, right? We're the same way. You can promote a listing, you can move up in the search, you can whatever. But we're not actually taking a success fee. We're not charging for leads. We're not selling your data to these 3PLs, right? These 3PLs all have access to it. And because of that, we think you get a better match, a better partner, and you're the one actually controlling your search. So we're much more self-service from that standpoint. We do have the traditional RFP, so you can send it to anybody on our platform or off our platform, so you can actually print ours We don't keep that. And we have staff that can help you make these decisions. However, that's a totally optional part of the platform. And we actually encourage people to do their own search.
Interesting. We'll talk about why do you think what do most businesses often get wrong when they're deciding whether to partner with a 3PL?
So, something I've been hearing from a lot of actually podcast hosts and people, because I talk to a lot of the e-commerce podcasters and people in the space, is that a lot of people view the 3PL almost like a merit badge. It's like, I'm in a 3PL now. So now my e-commerce company is growing, it's thriving, it's successful, right? So it's almost like one of those stages of growth that you graduate to and you hit it as a milestone, right? And I think in this way, it's a lot like a startup, right? So many people think, hey, my startup got funded. Now I made it, right? And the truth of the matter is, just like in the startup world, right? Sometimes you haven't, right? Well, if you're a startup and you go out and you raise money, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to succeed. Maybe you shouldn't have even taken that money. Maybe you could have grew without it, right? Maybe it was good terms. Maybe it was bad terms. The same thing's true for 3PL, right? Maybe it's time for a 3PL. Maybe you're going to get some extra hours back. Maybe you're going to be able to scale. Maybe there's going to be some cost savings there with the economies of scale. And then sometimes it just doesn't make sense. Are you really gaining that much time by not packing orders for 15 minutes? And it's about being honest about this, because that's where I see a lot of people go wrong is they want to make that step. They want to grow. They want to go out there and find that 3PL, but they're not actually taking the time to do the research, understand what they're paying for, and understanding what the net gains versus the drawbacks are going to be.
Mhm. And in terms of technology revolutionizing logistics, it's really fascinating. So, what do you think is the most exciting tech innovation happening in logistics right now?
Something that I think is a little further out, but I think is really cool is the autonomous trucking. So what I think is going to end up happening is there's going to be a hub and spoke model with this. So think of it this way: you're not going to see a truck with no driver in it going down the streets of Philadelphia. It's never going to happen. But what's going to happen is that truck with no driver in it's going to go from Dallas, Texas, right, to Harrisburg with no driver because it's just highway miles, right? It's easy to do. It's safer than a human driver. And shit, sorry. So it's safer than a human driver. And it's one of those things that I think's going to happen sooner rather than later, because anybody that's in logistics knows that the cost of freight is a large part of the puzzle, especially if people using multiple fulfillment nodes, right? Like a lot of people don't take into account the fact that moving those goods between warehouses, between points of fulfillment costs a lot of money. So I think that's the thing I'm most excited for, and I think it's coming.
Mm. And a follow-up question I have for you is I think the company most positioned to capitalize on what you were describing is Tesla. So then the other question I have for you is because Amazon also is like I've read somewhere a starting statistic is over half of its like warehouses are just like all robots. And so what do you think 3PLs will look like 10 years from now? Especially with AI and robotics, and are we headed toward fully automated supply chains?
I don't think fully automated supply chains even remotely possible. And this is where I differ from a lot of experts because I've lived it, I've been in the space for a very long time. And I think you're going to see two different points of thought, right? So you got one that is going to be extremely automated. This works great for small things like apparel, jewelry, right? A lot of things that we consume. The problem is a lot of times when you get into more specialized things, think things with gift wrap, think things that are irregularly shaped, things that are heavy, things that might have special storage requirements or special handling needs, right? A lot of this stuff cannot be handled by a machine currently. And we might be realistically a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades out from it being able to be handled by a machine. So, what I think is going to happen in the world of 3PL is you're going to go one of two ways. You're either going to go extremely robotic, which is going to cut down the cost. That's going to be a race to the bottom for everybody, right? So, those costs of picks, the cost of everything is going to go to zero. all the big investment banks are going to get behind there. There's going to be a couple winners, and there's going to be a lot of people that invested money and bought big expensive systems and they end up folding. I
Mm,
think the other direction is that you're going to become more boutique and more specialized, right? Maybe you do one or two things really well, right? Maybe you handle something that's a little more custom or unique, or something that's low volume or luxurious, right? So I think 3PLs that are going to have more boutique like services are going to thrive in an environment with increased automation.
yeah, interesting. And then another question I have for you is along these lines of, because I was just talking with a drone startup founder, and I saw recently like Amazon was thinking of same day delivery drones, where it's basically they showed this video, it was really cool. Like the drone can drop the package in your, and then it like the material item is sourced from like a local warehouse. So how do you see those drone delivery in this whole 3PL story?
I think drones are an interesting use case because I think they almost mirror my exact answer with the robots, right? I can picture a world in which a drone brings you a pizza. It's not that hard to picture, right? We already got those little robots like they have in San Francisco that drive down the street, right?
Yeah.
It's inevitable, but I do think that there is always going to be a place for the guy that stores a crated refrigerator, pops that refrigerator out of the crate, loads it onto a pallet, right? So it's some things are going to be able to be delivered by drone, some things are not going to be able to be delivered by drone. What I do think is that it's something that can be a differentiating factor for some logistics providers because there's going to be a high barrier to entry at first, right? And it's going to require a lot of upfront investment, which is going to give some people a first mover advantage. But ultimately, this is also going to drive down the cost of next day service because, like right now, you use courier services to do next day deliveries. So I think it's going to be revolutionary. I'm just curious once they actually get the whole drone thing figured out, how
Mhm.
big is going to be the max payload that thing can drop, right? And what's the recharge look like and all that. I saw some of the renderings of the Amazon hives that they're thinking of. They're pretty cool. But
Uh,
yeah, I think it's going to be a piece of everything. I think with anything like logistics, it's going to be not a one size fits all solution, but all these small parts working together.
mm.
And that's how the technology works too.
And along those lines, AI, how are you thinking about AI and positioning yourself or currently using AI in Racklify?
Yeah. So in about a week, 2 weeks, we're going to be rolling out our AI search functionality. AI is this hot new buzzword that everyone throws around. My hope is that AI is a footnote for Racklify. It's something that should just be a part of the product, not the product itself, right? And I think this is where a lot of people go wrong with the AI thing. So, like today, I was on a couple big companies' websites, and now they have at the top with AI, right? And it's once again, it's like the first mover advantage is already gone, right? Now everybody's implementing it. We don't need to know that you now have AI. So I think AI is an important tool, and I think it's something everybody should be using in their toolbox, especially now that the technology is so easy to interact with, it's so widespread. But the cautionary tale of this is it should not be your differentiating factor because anybody with a technical ability can basically take that, spin that up in a couple months, and boom, now your differentiation factor is gone.
Yeah. So you talked about the big players, Amazon, and how do you think smaller businesses can compete when they don't have the same resources as the big players in logistics?
Yeah. So small players in logistics, what they have to do is they have to find a niche and they have to do that well. Right. So one of my favorite words is fear of genius. Right. You got to know what you do better than everybody else. And that's what you got to do. Because if you're sitting here trying to do it all, you're just a lesser version of the other guy. Right. But if you do customer service better, right? Maybe you do FBA prep better. Maybe you have better rates on palletized storage. Maybe you're really strong at B2B, and a lot of companies aren't strong at B2B, right? If you can find these little smaller differentiating factors and pound them home, that's how I think you stand out in the world. So, one of my favorite examples I was ever given was in the world of gyms, right? So, you got places like Planet Fitness and their whole sales pitches. We got all these buildings, we got all these machines. The cost is low. We sell pizza on Fridays. How could $20 anybody have a better deal than $20? Meanwhile, there's people that spend hundreds of dollars on small boutique gyms because of the community building, the guys who work at the front desk, the questions you can ask, right? The fact that there's these things that they do better that the larger gyms can't copy. And I think this is really how 3PLs need to operate, right? They got to
Mm,
find their one or two things that they do better than everybody else, and they got to sell those.
yeah. And then for the audience, what's one myth about logistics or supply chain management that you wish you could bust once and for all?
So this is my personal pet peeve.
uh,
UPS is not always right. So, little known fact is that with the different carriers, think UPS, FedEx, Post Office, DHL, right? All these different carriers, they scan the packages. And sometimes they don't scan them. Sometimes they lose them. Sometimes they put them places. And it's a little known fact that in the 3PL community, everybody has the same problem. Like, what happens when UPS picks up the package? They don't scan it. We know it's going to get delivered, but now there's a customer beating down the door going, "Hey, you lost my package," and they think you want to give them free storage. And I think this is the biggest misconception in logistics is that just because these companies are huge, they're infallible. No, a lot of times the small 3PL is actually right in terms of the tracking and handling of the product.
yeah. Interesting. How can people actually, a further follow-up question is, we know we talked about same-day delivery and consumer expectations. Now people are expecting they don't wanna wait anymore, and how are those expectations reshaping the industry, sustainability? Obviously, the companies that won't be able to deliver same day are gonna be out, so curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So what I'm seeing right now is what is a lot of industry consolidation, right? So you have a lot of big players buying small and medium sized players. You have small players going out and getting a second or third or fourth building.
Yeah.
And then you have other players actually like forming partnerships in smaller networks. So, one of the things that I like to caution people with when they're searching for a 3PL is understanding if they're actually working with that 3PL or if they're working with a partner facility, right? So, this is a thing a lot of people are not aware of. So, a lot of the larger 3PLs that have on their website, "Hey, we have 63 buildings." They have 12 buildings and they have 50 partners that are small, independently operated 3PLs that are doing their grunt work for pennies on the dollar. So you're not actually getting the service of that bigger, wider known brand. They're just selling your business to somebody else. That's not necessarily a bad thing because it allows the 3PLs to compete with, say, somebody like Amazon or somebody with a larger network. But it's important to understand who you are doing business with, who has your products, and that you're receiving a good quality service. It might be perfectly fine to use a partner facility. Just I would be aware that this is one of the effects that's happening from these elevated expectations, and people are scrambling to grow these networks.
How can people connect with you and learn more about the work that you do and work with you?
Yeah, so anybody can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. We also have the Racklify YouTube channel, which has over 11,000 subscribers. So we're always putting out new content there, and I invite you to come find that. And you can just check out racklify.com. It's free to join, it's free to browse. You should spend as much time there as you do on Zillow.
Excellent.
Cool.
And thanks so much for coming on and keep up the great work.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Chris.